Hey, Galen, you're still muted, but I just turned the recording on so that we could share this later with people, if that's fine with you. And Corcus has kind of, we've been talking a little bit about Urbit here just the last few minutes. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and I'll let you kind of take it from here.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I talked to some subset of you guys a couple months ago, completely unprompted, or like I dropped into a conversation. It was a lot of fun, and I've been hearing updates ever since. I'm happy to connect with more of you guys. My main goal here is to like answer questions and sort of start like an open-ended conversation. But I brought a deck just to like lay the groundwork, because I felt like that's probably the best way to give people a very quick download, especially people who are like not that familiar. So I'm going to do a little song and dance, if that's okay with everybody else. You can interrupt me, honestly. But first I need to figure out how to do this, because I don't use Jitsi very much. Oh, well, you're going to be looking into the infinite abyss first. I think I'm going to share the screen. Okay. I see that you can see this, but can other people see this?
Okay. Yes.
Hopefully at least makes it into the recording. So one of the worst, now you can see my, one of the worst things about Keynote is that I can't see you while I talk, which I find so awkward. It's like there's one thing I don't like about remote work. It's presenting to a screen and a camera when I can't see the people in the room. Anyway, all right, let's start real quick. We'll go through sort of like, why do we build this? What are the like sort of governing principles of it? What is it concretely? And then why are we talking, at least in my understanding, just like why is this potentially interesting to you all? So I think there's being really three categories of, why would you want to rebuild the software stack? So first, and I think most frustrating to me, is that modern software for the most part is extremely complex. And when I talk about software, I'm really talking about basically like the web stack and anything we use to provide sort of like consumer cloud services. Biggest problem to me is that no one actually understands the whole thing. You're always welding together a bunch of different pieces. And then in the interface level, or like for a consumer of these things, you're always juggling a bunch of different apps and services, right? Because each one is this giant sort of monolithic tower. Software we use is also ephemeral, right? We can't totally depend on it, doesn't last forever. Services often disappear, and because you have this permanent marriage between the interface and your data, when a service goes away or runs out of money or who knows what, they disappear with your data. And then when that happens, links break, references disappear. We don't have like a complete picture of how things are connected, which is extremely frustrating, especially if you're trying to look at the history of how things happened. And then software, very obviously, is out of our control, right? Because the stack is so complex, it has to be run by, all of the things we use have to be run by other people. And those other people get to decide, what the security and privacy guarantees are, which is usually that they're very minimal. And then they get to change the interfaces, right? We aren't actually in charge of how, the UI looks for most of our services, and most of our services are not sort of data centric, right? It's up to someone else to decide how this thing looks. So the sort of lived experience of this, at least my lived experience of this, is that I feel like I lived in this kind of like, it's funny that I'm accidentally putting that in the past tense because I do use Urbit increasingly, but I still do live, and I think most of us live for the most part in this kind of digital planned community, right? Where all of the affordances of our digital lives are like totally predetermined. They're very fixed. And the feeling of that kind of at a very high level, it just like does not feel good. It does not feel personal. So the basic claim is that the current software stack is pretty much useless for really personal computing. Meaning when I have a direct relationship with the tool, I can make it suit my needs. I can make it suit the needs of my community. So without getting into the specifics quite yet, sort of our response to the situation at a very high level is that the first problem we need to solve is to actually produce a new stack. We need a new peer-to-peer network and an operating system that overlays existing infrastructure. So we need a new technical foundation. Basically, the claim is like the existing technology, for the most part, when it comes to like running the server side, is built for industrial scale software, where one person runs a server, everybody goes to that server. And it's very difficult to repurpose that existing software for a sort of personal use case. And we build Urbit really with like 3 primary design principles, and this goes across pretty much everything that we do. So probably the first things that I would want to get fixed in people's minds. So we build Urbit to be simple, and we want Urbit to have this kind of mechanical simplicity that you'd find in a bicycle from the 70s, right? I can take this whole thing apart, put it back together. A single person can actually understand the thing. I'm not actually claiming that Urbit is as simple as this bicycle, but as a kind of like overall goal, we want Urbit to achieve this level of a single person could understand the whole thing. We want Urbit to be durable. So like a pair of boots that you buy, you expect them to last for a really long time. Like you explicitly want them to be with you throughout a bunch of different experiences. So we want people to be able to use Urbit and trust it for a really, really long period of time, ideally even generations. I can't say we're there yet, but that's certainly a design goal. And we want Urbit to belong to you completely in the same way that your cabin in the woods feels like yours. You can do whatever you want with it. You're not worried about someone else redecorating while you're away. So we want Urbit to be simple, we want Urbit to be durable, and we want Urbit to belong to you completely. And our basic thesis is that if we can do this, we can produce this technology, sort of follow these design principles, we can actually make computing personal again. So I'm also definitely not claiming we've done that yet, but that's the overall goal. Okay, so let's talk about this concretely. We're not going to spend all of our time at the high level. So what the hell is this thing? What am I even really talking about, or where is it? So Urbit's really 2 pieces, Urbit ID, an identity system, and Urbit OS, this what we call an overlay OS, basically a program that runs on any Unix machine with an internet connection, aka any cloud server, most laptops, most phones. The world has been paved in Unix machines with internet connections, as I imagine most people on this call are aware. So Urbit ID is a decentralized, self-governing public key infrastructure that's live and deployed. So it's actually lives on the Ethereum mainnet now. We basically use it as, you can think of it as basically a registration from short name to public key, where I own that short name with a public key, and the Urbit ID suite of contracts just enforce the rules by which transfers and issuance of these names occurs. So an Urbit ID, I own an Urbit ID. Like we also have sort of like there's a key system such that you own your Urbit ID with a very short pass key. So your Urbit ID looks like something like the top one, which is actually my Urbit ID, Rapal. And then I own it with a short key like Poldic, Conteg, Palfin, Fosla. This is intentional, like you should be able to memorize the key for it. The idea being that, I can wake up in the desert, and if I remember this, I have both a username, a network address, a domain name, and money. The idea, I love this idea that it's a sort of like you don't even need any physical stuff anymore, right? It's like you actually just memorize this thing, the registration is on the chain, you have a node running somewhere, and that's all you need. We can get into more technical specifics there, but you get kind of the groundwork. And then so Urbit OS, totally separate, right? You own this name on the chain, and then Urbit OS is like basically a virtual machine that runs on any cloud server, as I talked about. It runs its own encrypted network, so all these nodes talk to each other. It's super compact. The whole system's about 50,000 lines of code, exclusive of the interpreter. We can talk about how that works if you want. And it's basically just like the whole thing acts like a database. So you really just need a file, your event log, and you feed that file to a program, Urbit OS itself, and you give it a key, right, to basically to decrypt it or to be able to encrypt and send packets and so on. That's pretty much it. This thing is real. I'll demo it for you really briefly in a sec. And we've been running test networks since 2013, which is really insane, actually. I feel like I haven't looked at this slide in a while. It's true. I mean, the networks have been up and down, and at this point, the network is quite stable. We used to reboot the whole network pretty regularly, but while there are still some durability and reliability concerns to using Urbit. As some of you may already know, it's getting better. It's gotten a lot better, and the whole network doesn't generally go down or come up again. So anyway, we think of the combination of these 2 pieces of technology, Urbit ID and Urbit OS, being the technical foundation for high trust communication, being able to send messages back and forth, collaboration, sharing documents, working on stuff together, and not yet being able to actually transact. So, sending money in the trivial case, one of the things that's interesting about talking to you guys is that I think there are all these other forms of conducting business, which have to do obviously with like interacting with contracts and so on, which your Urbit, being this very small footprint, secure virtual machine, is a good candidate for, hopefully it's someday actually holding your keys, but at the very least, sending transactions and interacting with the blockchain. So in the long run, the hope, right, is that we pull together all your sensors, devices, biometric data into one place. You have this kind of like complete history of everything that you've ever done in terms of every note, every post, image, video. You want all of these things in one system that's totally private to you and can last forever. And we want to give people a platform where they can speak freely, transact freely, because they're using a totally secure peer-to-peer network. So we're no longer even, in the world of, well, I trust that, a service is guaranteeing my privacy. It's like you can actually almost like audit the system itself. Even that is a little abstract. We're not going to look at the code, right? But what I can do is show you the sort of primary client that we built for Urbit. So you can think of a sort of simplistic way of thinking about Urbit is like personal Firebase plus network, right? It's like an authenticated data store. But we take this authenticated data store, and our take is like, well, look, the most powerful thing about this is you could do a bunch of stuff in one place. So our client for this, which I can quickly show, I'm assuming you guys see my whole screen so you can see this, right?
Yep.
I'm not, okay, cool. So this is landscape. This is like live actual Urbit. We've been using this since, we've always pretty much used Urbit, but we've used it, I think, sort of with more commitment in the past 3 months or so for both Tlon. You can see that I'm in two primary. So now I'm looking at chat, and I'm in two groups. I'm in Tlon and the broader Urbit community, which is open to anyone. And so this is, what you would expect in terms of it being a Slack clone. But the cool thing, or the thing that we think of as being slightly different than anything that you're familiar with, is that, so I have, everything is group centric. So I have a group, which is just a list of people. And then all of those people share a bunch of different resources. And those resources can be either notebooks, which are basically like someone in a blog and a forum, chat, or a collection of links. So let's see if we can open. The interface links always look good when people are sharing visual stuff. Maybe we should do music. Music is cool because we actually embed things. Anyway, this tool is pretty simplistic. Like, that's kind of the point. There's obviously no ads, it's like designed to be, it's designed around focus, right? Like, you don't want anything to interrupt you. And it's also designed to be like multimodal, right? As a group of people working together, we share different resources in order to stay connected, collaborate. So yeah, we like share references in here. This pattern is going away. There are too many clicks in between these two things. Since we're all remote, as I expect you guys are too, we write digests. So you get like these, this is me actually ceasing to write a digest. That's a whole other story, but you get the idea. These are all just markdown posts with comments. Yeah, happy to come back to this if people have like specific questions about features. The basic idea is that if you look at the way that people use cloud software, a group of people is always sharing a suite of applications. So our hope in the long run for this is that groups actually, that we can produce enough modules being something like chat, publish, links, whatever, that a group can like select some subset of them to sort of tailor their everyday, digital lives in the way that makes sense for them, and even potentially extend the system, write their own modules. We're not quite there yet. We're actually almost there. We're like distributing software as possible. Talk about that if it's interesting. Anyway, so yeah, landscape, that client shows off the thing that we're most excited about Urbit, which is that you can pull everything together, but anyone could write their own client. You could write a single purpose client. You could write a client that does similar things, that looks different, does different things. Urbit itself is just a piece of technology. So anyway, my approximation, what's interesting about DXdao and Urbit, as I was hinting at, I think our belief as outlined, right, is really that like the patterns and practices of a community should be reflected in the software that they use. Like, software should be flexible to how a community wants to use it. You guys are realizing this in terms of the governance of DXdao overall, at least as I understand it, and I'm a little bit at a distance, but that seems honestly quite impressive and interesting. And so it seems like there's sort of natural overlap in certain ways. So yeah, like I was showing you, we use Urbit day to day to talk to each other, to share links and writing and stuff. It is, yeah, it's certainly a young system in many ways, but it's feels good to be in this very calm, straightforward environment, and it feels good to be in an environment that we feel like some ownership and control over. We're biased, so you can. It's almost better to ask what it really feels like of like any given community member, people who are attracted to it purely because of what it is. But I imagine that there's some overlap there, just given the kinds of things that you guys do and work on and think about. So the reason that this is interesting now, in a different way than it was a couple months ago, is that right now, if you want to run Urbit, you have to self-host. So you have to actually set up a node yourself. And we've been working on a hosting platform that basically takes away the onboarding pain and the pain of keeping a node up, which actually, honestly, is not that. It used to be a lot more painful. But still, most people, right, don't want to like boot a VPS and install something. It's a few lines in the terminal, but even that is annoying. So with this hosting platform, yeah, we want to start onboarding people into Urbit and getting feedback from them. So my interest, and I think what Kenny's been working on talking about with you guys, is basically like to run a pilot program where we host some DXdao members, and basically like in exchange for feedback, we're happy to do the hosting, and I can talk about how that works. But the main thing for us is just to get people using the system and sort of putting some real weight on it in a way that we obviously sort of can't do ourselves. It's stable enough for us at this point. I'd say it's stable enough, but it's probably not. It's still, there are ways in which it could be more mature. So to be a little bit more explicit about this, like, yes, we would run the servers because of the way that Urbit is structured and the way we've set the hosting platform up. You can download your data at any time. That means just getting your event log out. It's pretty simple. We provide hands-on support and training. I mean, in whatever capacity is interesting. If you guys want to start experimenting with building stuff or dive into Urbit more, happy to sort of create direct points of contact with us, such that you guys can explore, move forward in whatever way feels good. And we also have, we have a pretty active grants program, or even we're working to improve. So if there are areas where DXdao members are interested in building stuff, we're very happy to give address-based grants to support those efforts. I'm happy to talk about that too. We didn't even really talk about the address space is scarce. The address space has value. We can get into that too. Urbit is impossible to cover in a short amount of time. Anyway, it's 9:18. You get the idea. Urbit is an open frontier, and there's a lot to sort of experiment with and explore. You guys seem like good candidates for that. So happy to answer questions or discuss how that might work or why that's a bad idea. There's nothing. I'm happy to kind of like go in any direction that seems important or interesting. I have no idea. Oh, there. Did I just stop sharing my screen?
Yep. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
So just opening for questions, I guess, right?
Yeah, my main goal is just to lay the ground, like make it obvious. If there are things you're not sure about, you should now know specifically what category they lie under, or whatever. But yeah.
What types of products do you think, or what aspect of it do you think would make most sense to try out first, or like to focus on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the use case that we are just like informal team communication and kind of loose collaboration. Like we don't have like live editing or inline commenting in the posts. So like we still, I guess like one way to think about it is like we still use Asana, Google Calendar, and Google Docs. I'd like to get rid of Asana and Google Calendar, but it's tough there are certain features of live editing that are, I think will be technically challenging. But I think that use case of like, well, you can sort of like chat, discuss proposals, and like collect references, just ensures like informal team cohesion is the one that we're the most interested in. And the thing that I'm always looking for from other people, other potential candidates, and I mean, most of the people who are interested in using Urbit are using it in an informal social way, right? Like building communities. But I like this potential for like more serious collaboration to happen. And I think in that case, I'm also really curious to hear whether people are like, oh yeah, like task management is the thing. I really love a simple task manager, because there are things kind of at the edge of what we're thinking of working on where getting that feedback from people would be super interesting and helpful.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned task management, because I think within the DXdao community, there is no standard task management. And I think some people are maybe using some things like maybe GitHub project boards or whatnot, or maybe something that they set up on their own. But I think one of the reasons that there isn't like this, just kind of a standard is because it's a decentralized community, and you have to basically sign up for these services, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody really can do that as like on behalf of the DAO itself. So, so something that's peer-to-peer might be a cool way to start doing.
Yeah, task management is a very tough problem from a product standpoint, because it can be, it's both sort of project management and day-to-day, like how you're managing your work stream. And my feeling is always that every product in this sort of arena is way over complicated, and that especially for technical people, like a much, much simpler solution would be desirable. But yeah, we haven't. It's really just an example. There are other things that, we've thought about integrating Jitsi, for example, like trying to get meetings in there, like getting meeting and calendaring in there would be interesting for collaborative teams. I mean, there's a bunch of things that, on the social side, it's like doing, say, short messages has come up quite a lot, doing more like Arena or even sort of semi-Pinterest style collections. Obviously, we do a lot of design work, which would be useful. So then, the goal is to get the like sort of SDKs and APIs to the point where, anyone can build a module, anyone can distribute a module. I'd say that's probably 6 months, 9 months out. Distributing it from a technical perspective is getting closer, but getting it fully into like package management level refinements, like not quite there yet.
Yeah. What are you most looking forward in terms of like features in Urbit? And yeah,
that's a good question. So let's see. The next, so we called what we were just looking at OS 1, and so the main kind of like OS 2 milestone is basically sort of changing the user experience around to be even more sort of group centric and make it easier to follow things that are going on in different modules, which right now is pretty sorely lacking. So you'll get kind of like a whole UI level, like a pretty big UI update. And after that, we'll hopefully do both a mobile client and a desktop client, such that the main advantage of the desktop client is actually to get signing in there. So right now you have this sort of two-pronged login to Urbit, where we have effectively like a dApp that is delivered over HTTPS, so it can touch keys, and then you log into Urbit with like a lower value key, so you can like separate ownership. So getting a standalone is nice, right? Because then we can have almost like this hypervisor that sort of like takes your keys, that's delivered to you over HTTPS, and then Urbit, of course, updates its own software over its own network. So we don't want that to touch high value keys, because we don't. While we're auditing the network protocol over the next couple of months, like you still want to be careful about what touches Urbit. But the cool thing about that is that then you get transaction. Now I can have Urbit say, hey, please sign this transaction. And you can sort of sign it in a secure enclave, like a JavaScript realm. And then actually have Urbit send that out to the chain, whatever chain that might be. And we'll try and support both ETH and BTC. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff there, I feel like, that is somewhat, that just like opens up this whole sort of area of exploration, I feel like, where it's like, well, how does Urbit interact with blockchain, which is kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, the biggest milestones really have to do with just basically like improve, in many ways, almost like improve the user experience and improve the developer experience, where I feel like this tiny suite of things is pretty good for us. But really, we want other people to be able to extend the system and improve on it. So that's like where I'd say like the latter half of this would be like stability, improve the APIs, improve the user experience overall, without any specific. I think we'll get short messages, like Twitter style messages, we'll do something related to that sort of arena-like, related to saving images and making image collections and stuff like that. But we're not about to like vastly expand the suite of modules. The hope is to really make that just like an easy, trivial thing to do. Well, as trivial as possible for like a third-party person. I mean, then yeah, I feel like I start actually realistically, and then I feel like this year I stopped planning beyond 6 months out because I think we're pretty clear on like, we like know where we want to go in the long run, and we know the problems that we need to solve to make, you know, Urbit as usable as possible for us and for the broader community. So, you know, with hosting, we'll onboard a lot more people into the system. And then my hope is that, yeah, over that time period, over that 6 months, we'll learn a lot from people actually using Urbit. And then, you know, we'll be able to kind of plan the next 6 months, basically.
Yeah, it's actually like a quite interesting partnership because like we have a lot of them, like not demands, but needs. And those like old school Web 2 stuff is not possible for us. So we're like actually properly forced to use Urbit, and it's I think we will strongly benefit out of it, and hopefully also like the Urbit community, because we're also builders. So this is like a really nice way to contribute to a more beautiful future, where we actually build something and anyone can just like reuse it exactly how we build it. Like even the interface is not like DXdao branded interface, but they just like basically install the package and they just use it. And I think that's a very positive thing for me as a DXdao member, that we can contribute for a better future where we keep like where we're sovereign and we stay sovereign.
Exactly right. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what this is for. Like, I feel like having been through, without going all the way, it's just like I spend plenty of time like building centralized software, and the most sort of tragic thing about it is exactly as you describe. It's like you build it and then it's like you've branded it, but not only is it this branded thing, it's like it's so completely monolithic as a piece of software that has no future. Like it just has no ability to kind of live on or benefit anyone else outside of its specific use case. And in many ways, that's been for me like the primary project. It's like you go down that rabbit hole all the way. You're like, oh shit, like there's so much that needs to be fixed here in order to solve this problem. And now I feel like we're kind of like all the way back up, but not to the fully to the top of that, or like haven't fully solved that problem. But the hope being, that then when people, I mean, it's very much like this vision of computing existed once. It just existed without a network. And so like once you introduce a network, you know, reimagining personal computing is a whole new problem. But the dream of like when, you know, everyone had an actual PC that they could understand is relatively simple. This was the ethos of building software. That's exactly right. Basically, I hope that, and you guys are well suited in that. Like my hope is to find people who want to contribute in that way, and you have this kind of symbiotic relationship of like this loose collaboration of open source, but almost all the way up to like the interface level where people can actually share things without. I hate, like the worst thing to me is when it's like a new service comes out and I like it, but I mean I'm like a software prepper. I'm just like, I can't even try this because I don't. Like the overhead of trying something new means I have to commit myself to it, and then I have to think about, am I ever going to get out of it, or like how's it going to, I'm like looking up their investors to see if it's going to last, you know. I like don't want people to ever do that.
Yeah, Galen, on an interesting point I saw on Urbit chats last night, that you remember that service Delicious that was like a bookmarking thing?
Yeah.
Like it's gone through so much, and it's been gone for a long time, and people really loved it. But it's actually like coming back because somebody finally purchased it again that was involved early on, and even has a bunch of the user data. And he was saying in the Urbit chats, like, hey, if you want your data, you can get it back if you had it post 2010 or something like that. But that's a whole host of software that I remember loving to use, and it's just gone because Google decided, you know, there aren't enough users anymore.
Is that who bought it? Yeah, I remember the death of Delicious was sad. And yeah, I think the guy who bought it is like the pinboard guy, right? That's like what's kind of amazing about it. It's nice to see pinboard able to do that. Yeah, we don't want, even though that's a success story, I'm like, it's too fraught. It should have never happened to begin with.
Another thing I'll say about downloading your data, like I've quote downloaded my data before. Like I quit Facebook years ago and I was able to download my data, which is basically a JSON file that I can't do anything with unless I want to build an interface or something, and then it even can't talk to anything. But what we mean by download your data is that it's a complete, like, I don't know if anybody here has built PCs, but I always thought that you should be able to take a hard drive out of one PC and put it into another and it should just work. That of course does not work at all. But that's kind of what you're doing with your Urbit, which is called a peer file. All your data is like in this little folder. You can take it and put it into a different computer, and it will just start up right from where you left off without like any sort of friction in the sense of like, installs or drivers or anything else like that. So when we say download your data, we mean like download it, boot it on your own desktop, and right away start right where you left off. And I've done this. I've actually done it, moved it from the cloud down to my laptop, done some stuff with it locally, and then moved it back up, all within like an hour.
Yeah, the demo that we should do, or we used to do, which is still a good demo, is basically like you open Urbit's shell, type a couple of characters, and then kill it from another terminal. Just kill the process, then move the peer, move the whole event log, and restart it, and like the characters are still in the command line, right? Because it's just a function of its event log, so everything you typed is in its event log, and it knows exactly how to reproduce its state. That does work well. It kind of has to work. Like the system would not be, it would not be working, or it wouldn't be satisfying its goals, I think, if that didn't work. I guess I'm curious to hear a little bit more, because maybe I can ask you guys questions too. Like, how do you, and some of these might be kind of naive in a way. So when you do in fact vote on things to work on, is that correct?
Yes.
And where do you vote? Like, do you have some form of like a DApp or something that acts as a voting interface?
Yes. So because Ethereum is very expensive right now and very slow, we don't we have a voting system on Ethereum, but a lot of governance is done in forums because no one has like $6 for a vote.
Yeah.
So right now we're actually in a difficult state, but we have a well-defined governance system installed. It's called holographic consensus, which is voting with like a prediction market, which can influence the way a proposal life cycle is going through. So if someone is like very sure that a proposal will go through, they can bet money on it, which will bring the proposal in a fast mode, boosting mode. Yeah. And then the proposal will be voted on. And there are also like penalties. So you actually need to do a lot of like outside communication to like have a feeling of will something go through or not? Because if you vote for something which will not go through, you will lose reputation, which is like the non-transferable governance representation. So that's like a very important point. Like DeFi and Ethereum has like governance tokens, but they can be bought and sold. But the way we do it, you can't buy or sell governance shares. That's very important because we don't want people. Say again?
They're like earned reputation. Like you shouldn't be able to buy them because you earn them by doing stuff, basically.
Exactly. Like right now there's like social consensus that everyone who's working like has a right to request reputation. we may extend that, but right now we actually want to have like true members getting a stake of the whole collective, which is done by work.
Yeah. I mean, you could do, the first thing that comes to mind is that you could do a lot of, because Urbit, so when you run in, like in the case of chat, someone decides to host a channel. When people join that channel, they, simply connect peer-to-peer to that other node, but they also replicate the whole log. All of those messages are at the network, like transport, well, not actual transport, but like at the network, our protocol running over UDP. Everything is like encrypted and authenticated. So you're basically doing diffs of application state, right, back and forth between two running applications on different nodes. In what you're describing to do voting, I wonder whether what you could do, the first thing I think of is like you could do something where you guys actually do voting on Urbit and then sort of serialize the state of the DAO as it's held on Urbit, which is, so holding down Urbit's basically free, but you could do something where you kind of periodically serialize its state and send that to the chain, or even just like, take just a hash, something cheap to store on Ethereum. As a, because maybe you want some like record or like something consensus like to memorialize it. But yeah, paying $6 a vote is pretty crazy.
I mean, sorry to interrupt you, but the beauty is that you guys actually like picked Ethereum for your identity system right now. Yeah. So like all those Ethereum addresses who hold reputation basically join Urbit with the same address, which use like Urbit can detect how much rep they have. So we could basically vote without any costs.
Yeah, you could start. So right, so it's like if you own the Urbit name, whatever, SIGDEV Pilnup with the same Ethereum address that you hold some reputation, then Urbit can look to the chain and see that fact, but then of course know that any message it got from SIGDEV Pilnup is very likely to be, we assume is owned by that same owner, or like,
which is very powerful. Like that's something you can't do anywhere. I mean, sure, you can build up monolithic forum with crazy Ethereum node fetching, but we want to build something which like we paid for and it will last for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Well, identity and reputation is a very thorny problem, right? Like, an Urbit solution is super simplistic even. I mean, it's just it's like borders on stupid. It's just, there aren't that many of them and they are, distributed in a sort of para-decentralized way. We can get into it if you want, but I think like that's the, it's probably one of, even originally, when I first found Urbit, that was like one of the first things I was like, oh, you finally figured this out. Like, just, durable decentralized identity that can also be used to transfer data. It's insanely important, especially for, I mean, it's interesting to think about in your case, because I've been thinking about this. I'm like a DeFi outsider, but everything I see about it, I'm like, how do you do this without reputation, like without identity? And every time I've been trying to do like little bits of research, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, it's crazy that no one knows anything about their counterparty, really. And then in order to do that, you're kind of like, you're switching out. It's like, how many times have people basically confirmed an Ethereum address, over a centralized chat service, and then, gotten on the phone or whatever? It just feels like insanely clunky.
Yeah, it's like specifically for our use case, like there is a lot of history how the DXdao arose, and we actually don't know most of the addresses. Like I would say 15 addresses I can detect as like community members, but the rest is like I don't know them, and it's a weird feeling. But it seems like it's still working without knowing the true identities behind those addresses.
Oh yeah, you don't. I think. I mean, this is like I'm not an advocate of like real name identity by any. I'm saying like strong pseudonymity is great. Like that's amazing. But because ETH addresses have no Sybil resistance, so you don't really have any. You don't really know anything about the address. Like all of those other addresses could be one person, basically. You don't really know.
Yeah, and I think Urbit can help dramatically with that, because like the longer someone is actually using the Urbit, and especially with the combination with that the same address is connected to the DAO and Urbit, and over time you have some kind of trust that this is like one guy, and like if he actually comments on something, we know that this is
Right.
definitely the same address. And like on DAO Talk, it's some name which like can influence proposals and outcomes, and like maybe he signals yes on DAO Talk, but votes no on the Alchemy, like on the DXdao system, which is like very difficult. And I think Urbit can help fix that, because we exactly know, oh, you signaled in the comments that you're pro, but you're voting against, and then you're like getting suspicious that there's like some voting.
You can at least like go talk to them. Then you have a channel to go ask the person, and like you can
Exactly.
Yeah, I think of reputation as a very, very hard. It reminds me of like sort of like most cognitive science problems, where it's like, you know, the way that, if you think of it from first principles in terms of like, how do I develop my understanding of someone's like trustworthiness, like that's a very complicated thing, and I'm not even sure if you can, it's easy to formalize. But you know, the more that I get to know someone, the more that I interact with them, and you know, we work together, the more that I know whether or not to trust them. So I think of like, you know, and yeah, I mean, really just echoing what you're saying, it's like what you want is for people to just say, well, I know that like such a key owned such an Urbit address and it hasn't changed hands, and we've had a bunch of conversations, like we had all these interactions that were authenticated with that key. So then it's just like, let it, like it's a human, like let the humans do the actual sort of storing of like, do I know or remember this person? And I think there's like a lot to that. I like, one of the reasons I really like the idea of just simple payments over Urbit is because you think of like, well, like if I want to do business with someone, I don't necessarily need to see their like eBay rating. I just want to talk to them a little bit and get a sense of, it's almost like like a Craigslist in-person transaction, right? You can generate a lot of trust in those like 5 minutes before you like hand the thing over. And so, yeah, I like the idea of like, you can do that just by talking over a network. And then because you know, then you don't have to be like, wait, read me the Ethereum address again. You just actually know exactly what the address is. You can pay them directly. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I don't think this kind of signal tool is in Urbit right now. It's very DAO specific use case.
Yeah.
And like we don't have anyone who knows whom.
Yeah.
How do you think like that I think the signaling tool would be enough for us to completely convince us to like use that as our primary. It totally makes sense for us. But like how do you think can we get to the point that we have that tool for us?
Yeah. Well, so first thing that we need to articulate more clearly that I think is really important is, so if you think of Urbit, like Arvo, the kernel, like Urbit OS as just like personal data store plus network, think of it sort of like a meta protocol, meaning Urbit at the user space level has all of these individual, what we call agents that are basically like, they're a data store plus some business logic. So like chat is one, links are one. We're gonna, and each of those exposes an HTTP API. And so that means like I could, you know, I can just write JavaScript against that specific endpoint. We'll move, the idea is to move towards even more generalized agents. So like a graph database, I think probably like a geospatial database, biometric data, and so on. So the main thing I'm trying to get across is basically like, so writing each of those agents is like less than 1,000 lines of code. They're not really very complicated. They're very, because everything is handled by the like identity, authentication, message passing, all that stuff is sort of OS level. So you're writing these, like, you can think of them almost like stored procedures. They're like really condensed. Writing user space Hoon is not that hard. So if you want to write a custom protocol, that's like reasonably, a motivated, like when we get, motivated engineers and onboard them, a really motivated engineer could start writing, competent Hoon in like a week or two. It's not really that hard. It just looks fucking crazy. See, especially at that tier, right? If you want to like go down and work on the system, like that's like, think of that like you're going and like cracking open Postgres or whatever and like actually working on the internals of the database is hard. So that's worth noting. There are two ways to look at what I'm saying. It's just basically like, well, as our protocols mature, there's a world in which you could build this without actually, by just calling out to individual endpoints, like sign and send this transaction, get me these messages back. And you could build something that's a standalone. I'd say that's at the end, towards the end of the year. The other option is definitely like, we are happy to fund development like this and try and connect. There are lots of community members who want to work on things like this. So the thing that might be worthwhile is just crafting a proposal and there are tons of motivated community members who like love finding things to work on to earn address space. So I kind of feel like we should just write. It's such an interesting use case. Like I would love to see something like this exist. We should just.
Yeah, it's also like it's not a playground for us. It's like a necessary thing we need as soon as possible. It's like it's not a playground. It's not testing. We need it, and we will need to use it. So like I'm just a small part of the membership, but I would bet that we would also like incentivize with Ether or DAI to get that thing going. Like we need that, and so from our side, we would do our best to accomplish that.
I bet we could assemble a team of. I mean, it could because there's both front end and Urbit. Like there's JavaScript side and Urbit side things to do here. So I would assume that you could. We run the most informal form of a DAO, which is that people just hang out in the chat and we say like, hey, do you want to work with us? And they do it. But through some combination of that and some potentially either DXdao members or adjacent people, I imagine you could probably get this done as a community project. Yeah, I feel like that'd be great. I would love to do that. Like, let's try and the first step is just to kind of like write it out. I'd have to understand a little bit more what you guys have. Well, maybe I just need to look at. Is there any way I can look at, or we can look at how this is done already, or is it like private to DXdao members?
What specific?
Like the discussion and voting. It sounds like there's discussion in one place and then there's voting in another place.
Right. So the voting is happening on a dApp. The discussion is happening on a Web2 forum.
Yeah.
So it's like, but yeah, like my goal, like the easiest way to replace the Web2 forum and the chat is by using Urbit. I mean, that's basically there, and we can use that and can start using that. And like the way governance work for us is someone is creating a proposal happening on the forum. There's the discussion, and like there, Urbit can already be like much more useful because we could make sure that the forum proposal is happening on Urbit as a forum thread too.
Yeah.
But then we have like a signal voting component where like first people can discuss and actually like do a signal vote.
Yeah.
So that's my like vision how we would love to see that.
Yeah, doesn't strike me on its face as particularly hard.
No, I don't think either. Like, I mean, I'm not a Hoon developer, but yeah.
I mean, Urbit already calls out to Ethereum, right? That's how we download. We have to check chain state, and we don't send. We've actually built Urbit side utilities to send transactions, but we don't expose them to the public really right now, but they exist. So yeah, no, Urbit can talk to the chain. That part doesn't worry me so much. I wonder whether you would want to, like I was saying, though, you'd want to do that only on Urbit, save all the gas costs, and then you'd have to design some way that you're, like memorializing it or sending it out. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, like, I mean, just having a signal vote is already enough to like get a really good feeling about how the proposal will end, and
Okay, got
then
it.
we could do the on-chain vote, and it's like clear that there is some kind of consensus, right?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right, and like we could even create proposal transaction inside Urbit, like if we are like thinking about a step further.
Because if you do have parity between ETH address and Urbit address, or there's some way of attesting to those things, then it's fine. Like you could make that clear even in the, I guess, Alchemy or whatever in the voting interface.
Yeah.
This is interesting because it's also something I think we would use. Like I feel like actually having some kind of formalized, it's an interesting potential sort of like community tool in general, right? Like how do you formalize take a proposal through revisions, get consensus on it, and then like kind of finalize it.
Yeah. I mean, it would be great if we actually can use the Signal voting process as actually like a true vote, and then like create one transaction and put it on Ethereum, because it's super expensive, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And Galen, I would imagine Dalton Collective would really love this as well.
Right. Yeah. I've always thought that was like we used to kick around this idea of kind of like Urbit as a side chain in a way, right? That it's like because Urbit is, I mean, by comparison, Urbit is kind of slow. Like, well, actually Urbit's performance has improved a lot, but like, by comparison to conventional software, Urbit is definitely slow. But by comparison to a blockchain, Urbit is like insanely fast. So no, I think that it's like well suited to this problem of like do a bunch of, either collect a bunch of things that you want to turn into transactions, hash them and then send them, or bundle them and then send them, or just do, something to that effect. It always sort of at a high level made sense to me and seemed like a really obvious use case. It's interesting. Sorry, I'm like, to think about this more. I want to look at, we should try and craft some kind of, I feel like the next step is just to start making a concrete proposal somehow, or developing this into something we can move forward. I also feel like you and I are talking, and I don't know how many people are on this call, but I don't know how you are a collective, right? Like, I feel like I should be feedback from other people. Yeah. How do you do business with a collective? Someone tell me.
And like we had our first VC talk yesterday, and they were like just a bunch of guys joining, just like to hang out and to like listen what they actually have to say. And it was definitely weird because those guys are interested in making more money, and we're actually interested in just creating something useful.
Yeah.
So it's just like worlds colliding, and we're like. Personally, I'm not really interested in getting money to make the other guy happy because he made more money.
Yeah. Well, I think many good things have happened at the intersection of people wanting to make money and people wanting to make good things. So that oftentimes can work out okay. But usually so long as the person who wants to make good things is driving, that's generally how I think about it. But I just mean I'm just saying I like want to, I don't know, I'm happy to hear other perspectives on this, or or not, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if people want to say anything, but yeah, the general, I think we've already talked about it, but the process of making a proposal, it usually starts, like this, talking either in the chats or, on the call or in Keybase, and then I think the next thing would be like a DAO Talk post to get some, give people time to asynchronously kind of view the whole thing and make comments, and then finally the real deal is the Alchemy proposal. Yeah, I think it'd be cool to see all the stuff that's in Alchemy stored in a peer-to-peer way, because it's like hashed and on IPFS, but the actual documents need to be.
How do I look?
Yeah, alchemy.DAOstack. Let me find it.
Yeah, which is also important, Galen, that this is a protocol DAOstack to other people as well. So if any of these tools are built in Urbit, they are applicable to any DAO stack DAO, which is
Right.
pretty interesting.
Yeah, and currently, basically, the whole framework is not usable because it is just expensive, and basically all those communities can't interact with each other because the blockchain is just way too expensive. So it will enable a lot of like freedom to those communities again if they actually like just move to Urbit. I just sent you the link from the weird alchemy interface.
Got it.
Right, and if you like click on proposal on the left, you actually see like those beautiful boxes, which are like smart contracts, which do a specific thing for the collective.
Sorry, say that again. I was.
Did you like? Do you saw the link I posted?
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
chat?
So I'm looking at I'm looking at a DAO stack page of DXdao.
Right, and on the left there's like a navigation, and when you click on proposals, you see like those smart contract plugins. So each box is doing a specific thing for the DXdao. Like the names are horrible, but they do a specific thing. So like even our homepage is completely controlled by the smart contracts. So there's no human who has control of the domain. If someone wants to change the domain, the website, they actually need to make a proposal with like a specific like IPFS links to replace the old website. So yeah, even the website is controlled by the collective, which is pretty cool.
That's amazing. That is really cool. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap here. This is so interesting to me because I feel like this was when I feel like I was aware of people thinking about how to do this, like how to actually, run a DAO. I feel like maybe probably almost like 3 years ago, I was like, this is amazing. This is a really great use case. And Urbit is well suited to handle it. And then I sort of was like, well, I don't know, somehow we just like didn't know each other. Like then every example I saw of it didn't seem to be actually working. And I was like, well, we're not kind of technically ready I wasn't ready to go in and be like, no, you guys should really use Urbit. So I think, and then I just haven't been aware of anyone actually doing this. Looking at the history of the proposals, I'm like, oh, you guys do it. You actually really use this. And the website thing is that's so cool. I've like always wanted something like that to exist. That's like one of the most tragic things of any kind of like, I don't know, all the online communities I was a part of in the early days, like that was like the worst thing was like, it's like the moderator, like the operator would just get like burned out, like no one wants to be in that position. And if it's just a collective of people working together, it always kind of sucks to have to make someone do that. So that's
I'm also like, I'm really curious if it's like, I saw you guys push out like a moderation in groups or like permissions, right?
Yeah.
At least, and like I would, is it based on like an Ethereum address or like it would be amazing to see that the DAO is actually controlling the whole group, right?
Oh, you could do that. It doesn't right now. I think it's sort of it's pretty simplistic, right? It's like someone starts the group and they can assign moderators or other owners. But the idea that you could have it like transfer group ownership, you could probably do that. Just have
and you can delegate it too, because this is exactly what Dalton does. So Dalton's multisig owns the star, which is just a multisig, and it can call out to the Azimuth smart contracts. So if your DAO, if it can call arbitrary bytecode to any endpoint, then that's the ownership. It can do the sort of smart contract level stuff. But then you can delegate members like a management key, which is to say somebody who can actually run the ship and create new groups and all that other kind of stuff. And then if that person doesn't do it, they can be voted out by the collective. So does that make sense?
Yeah. So the DAO has control of the ship,
Yep.
And the ship creates all the group and interaction. But if someone is like malicious and tries to like ban most of the users, we can like remove the whole control of the ship and delegate it to some other ship, right?
Well, so the collective owns it, meaning it has rights over transfer and that sort of thing. Think of it as like property rights, and then that can designate a manager who can create network keys, who can create the group, who can set permissions, do all this other kind of stuff. And then one level lower than that in the actual client landscape, there'll be other affordances. So like these two are admins and can do all this other kind of thing. But let's say so the person who actually can log into some server somewhere and like do stuff, that's a pretty high level like access, but that can be revoked by the collective at any time. So in the Dalton collective example, the multisig owns it, but I'm the manager. So I maintain the actual working of the star or the ship stars, and it's more nomenclature, but the actual instance of Urbit itself, I'm the one that keeps it up, but I can always be kicked out.
Got it. So like regarding the hosting offer, when can we start?
That's a good question. So we're, let's see. I think we have like 10 or 15 ships in our own hosting infrastructure right now, which is just company ships. And so our hope is we're still trying to break it, and we did manage to break it last month. And so then we sort of went and fixed a bunch of stuff and started over. Conservatively, I don't know, 6 weeks to 2 months would be like where I'm like, we'll probably be confidently welcoming others in. I would hope that it's sooner. But let's see, well, we're almost at like mid-quarter. So, I mean, let's just assume we do it next quarter, towards the end of the quarter, something like that, like to be somewhat conservative. I'm happy to keep, it seems like you guys have, Kenny, you have I only enter into this conversation periodically, but there's some existence relationship here where we have like lines of communication are open. The best way to do it, you guys have a relatively large membership, right?
Yeah. Like at least I don't expect that. There's always a core group, and I think we will not exceed 10 members.
Oh, yeah, that's
so. At least at the beginning, at some point, if we actually reach it, I can run my own Urbit on myself to give someone like a slot.
That's fine. I think that's completely fine. 10, 20 people is no problem. Like once you get up into the hundreds, I'm like,
that's not the case. No. Like I think we have like a very nice opportunity to start very slow because most people actually don't care.
Yeah.
So like, do you think we could have that earlier?
It's certainly possible. It's funny. This has been getting hosting to run well it runs pretty well, but it is a bit of a saga internally. So I keep I've overpromised on this before, and I don't want to do that. Things are going well right now in terms of what we've been testing, but I don't have a great answer for you there. But yeah, ideally, let's just keep in touch, and if in the next 2 weeks we're like, hey, everything's really running well, we're happy to onboard more people. You guys are welcome to give.
Yeah, and it's also I think as soon as we do that, we can also approach the signaling tool, right? Someone needs to implement that, and then we can also test it with a small group. And then once that is actually working, and the hosting is working, then we open it up a little bit bigger.
Right. I would say tackling that as a long, kind of latter part of this year project probably makes sense. I feel like the sort of action item I'm most immediately interested in is trying to nail down the specific requirements, basically. What does it? Yeah. I'm looking at what's going on in DAO Talk and sort of the overlap between Alchemy and DAO Talk, and I think working together to nail down what would look like as a I mean, it may be that you guys want to internally propose to even try and do this in terms of that may be the way that kind of decision is made on your end. But my thinking would be like just to develop a proposal that we can like show off to the Urbit community, and then maybe we can share on both sides. That seems like it would, it's the kind of thing you could do in a week or two, but it's not like trivially easy. It like requires a bit of that.
Yeah.
I feel like the task management piece is maybe a good one to trial because, like, I mean, on the chat and even DAO Talk, right? Like, if you had a small, like a subset of the community doing a trial with Urbit, you can't really, even if you're in that trial group, you still would have to interact with the main Keybase or DAO Talk chat because of the network effects. Like, you need everybody to see that stuff. The nice thing I think about like task management is you could actually have a subset of the group that could just fully use it, no problem, right? Because and there's nothing there already, so it actually would kind of solve a problem for some people. That's just my 2 cents. Yeah.
No, but that also points out probably an important thing for you guys, which is like you don't want to create factions or create like kind of like subgroups or something where part of the DAO is like kind of like invisible to the rest of it, basically. Yeah,
I mean, and if it's just a trial group, like, people could mess around, but I think it would just be impossible to like significantly move over the chat or the DAO Talk post to a trial, right? Like, it would basically be duplicating.
But you guys work on, it's like, does some part of, when you guys take on projects, like not everyone works on projects, so is it sort of like their project level teams that work on something? Because maybe it'd be like, could you take like a project level team and have them, they hang out on Urbit most of the time and sort of publish reports, or I don't know what, you see what I'm saying? Maybe like
we have there's a developer team who's working full time for the DXdao, and this is definitely the first group who will move.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because we all have to interact with Geronimo, so he's going to make us use it.
I'm going to rage quit Keybase.
I want to, the collective is a good thing, but no collective is truly flat or something like that. There's a power hierarchy, but they're always different. I'm like, who's doing what's going on here? now I'm starting to see how it works.
I mean, Van Mortal here in the chat is making the point that we already kind of have enough silos, enough like platforms and things to keep up with, so to expect that from the community at large would be kind of bad. But maybe we can start around like an existing kind of smaller group within the community.
Yeah, that I totally get that. I mean, I would, I mean, Urbit is anti-silo. Like, don't make it worse for yourselves, for sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's keep talking. Basically, I mean, we can try and figure out if there's some natural way that some subgroup might try this out, or what the sort of like a hosting pilot might look like. I mean, we can probably do these things in parallel, and then we can talk about what it would look like for some sort of hybrid DAO Talk alchemy thing to exist on Urbit, which I think is really cool and would be broadly useful outside of this specific case. But it's nice to talk to you guys.
Sounds great. Thanks for joining.
Yeah,
for taking the time.
Let's talk again soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.